This isn't just an attack. It's an eviction notice. It's a psychological operation, posted by the killers themselves to amplify the threat. For over 10 months, this was a daily reality. A human safari, designed to make life unbearable. And in October 2025, the United Nations gave this systematic terror an official name, a crime against humanity. This is the story of a system. A system that connects a tiny, low-cost drone, to a coordinated state policy, to one of the oldest and most serious crimes in international law, the forcible transfer of a population. For months, the world saw the random, ghoulish, videos trickling out of southern Ukraine. They looked like the isolated, cruel acts of individual soldiers. But investigators at the United Nations found something far more disturbing. They found a pattern. This wasn't random cruelty. It was a systematically coordinated campaign. The UN's report, A8497, concludes that these relentless drone attacks were the mechanism for a much larger crime. They weren't just trying to kill. They were creating a coercive environment of pure terror to strategically empty a land of its people. This is how modern technology is used to execute an ancient atrocity. In the language of international law, the most profound condemnations are often delivered in the driest, most bureaucratic terms. A8497. It sounds like a catalogue number. A simple report to the UN General Assembly, submitted in October 2025. But this document, the work of the UN's Independent Commission of Inquiry, represents a definitive and crucial legal escalation. It is the moment where the official language of the international community shifted, from documenting the chaos of war, to formally identifying the architecture of a crime. The report's conclusion is unambiguous. It states that the actions of the Russian Federation are not just a collection of isolated war crimes. It concludes that they have met the high legal threshold for two distinct crimes against humanity. These are not words the United Nations uses lightly. For years, reports from this commission and other bodies have documented atrocities, torture, unlawful killings, attacks on civilian infrastructure. These are, by themselves, grave war crimes. But Report A8497 goes a critical step further. It argues that these are not simply the tragic, criminal byproducts of a brutal conflict. Instead, it concludes that these acts are components of a plan. The first crime, murder. The Commission's finding is not about a single act of killing. It is about a systematic campaign of killing. The report details the recurrent and relentless drone attacks on civilians along a 300-kilometer stretch of the Dnipro River. It describes a reality where residents were hunted, where drones would chase individual people, attack public transport, and deliberately strike humanitarian aid distribution points. This, the UN concludes, is not combat. It is a systematic policy of murdering non-combatants. The second crime, forcible transfer of population. This finding is perhaps the report's most significant contribution. It details a dual-pronged strategy to achieve one goal: the depopulation of key Ukrainian regions. The first prong is what lawyers call constructive forcible transfer. The report argues that the drone campaign, the human safari, was designed to create a coercive environment, so unbearable, that it left civilians with no choice but to flee. This terror itself is the weapon of displacement. When you are forced to abandon your home because of a deliberate policy of terror, you have been forcibly transferred. The second prong is direct forcible transfer. In areas already under Russian occupation, the Commission found a different, more bureaucratic method: formal deportations and transfers of civilians, backed by official deportation orders issued by Russian authorities. Two different methods, one unified strategy. In the territory Russia covets, it uses terror to drive people out. In the territory it holds, it uses paperwork to force them out. This conclusion is the major legal escalation of the report. To understand why, one must understand the difference between a war crime and a crime against humanity. A war crime, as horrific as it is, can be an isolated act. A soldier, or a rogue unit, can commit a war crime in breach of their own military's rules. A crime against humanity is a different category of evil. It is, by definition, an act of state. The law requires a specific, high threshold to be met. First, the acts must be widespread or systematic. Widespread refers to the scale. The attacks took place over a vast 300-kilometer area. Systematic refers to the organization. The report found these attacks were not random. They were a planned and organized campaign, recurring for over 10 months. Second, the acts must be directed against any civilian population. The UN concluded that civilians were not collateral damage. They were the intended object of the attack. But the final element is the most important. The acts must be committed as part of a state or organizational policy. This is the linchpin. This is what makes a 8497th a legal watershed. The Commission states it found clear evidence of a coordinated state policy. This single phrase changes everything. It means the legal culpability does not end with the 19-year-old soldier holding the drone controller. It means his actions were not a failure of discipline, but the intended result of a policy. It links the crime from the operator to the commander who supervised the unit, to the general who planned the campaign, to the highest levels of the Russian state that financed, supplied, and directed this strategy. Previous reports may have spoken of potential crimes against humanity. This report concludes they have been committed. It shifts the legal narrative from documenting the tragedy of war to building a case against the architects of an atrocity. This is the first part of the system. The mechanism of the crime. To build its case, the UN Commission did not look at the entire, sprawling 1,000-kilometer front line. It focused its investigation on this specific, 300-kilometer stretch of Ukrainian-controlled territory. What it found was not the sporadic, back-and-forth shelling one might expect from a war zone. It found a systematic and recurrent campaign of drone attacks. This was a daily reality. The report is built on a foundation of 226 interviews with victims, witnesses, aid workers, and local officials. Their testimony paints a picture of a life made unlivable. One man, a resident of the Kherson region, told investigators, quote, "We are hit every day. Drones fly at any time, morning, evening, day, or night, constantly. This relentless, planned, and organized pressure is the very definition of systematic. But it was the nature of the attacks that revealed the true intent. This is what residents and analysts came to call the human safari." The UN report details how Russian forces used these drones to chase civilians. Survivors repeatedly told investigators they felt hunted. This is a fundamental inversion of the laws of war. The foundational principle of distinction in international humanitarian law demands that combatants must distinguish between military objectives and the civilian population. The evidence in Report A, 8497 shows this principle was not merely breached, it was inverted. Civilians were not accidental, collateral damage. They were the primary target. The Commission documented the wide array of non-military targets that were systematically hit. They list individual civilians on bicycles, in private cars, and waiting at bus stops. They list public transport. They list private homes. And they list targets that have special, protected status under the Geneva Conventions. The report documents repeated strikes on humanitarian aid distribution points, locations with no military value, whose only purpose is to sustain civilian life. Even more damning, the Commission identified numerous instances of deliberate attacks on first responders. This is the tactic known as the double tap. A first strike hits a civilian target. Then, as emergency services, ambulances, fire brigades, rescuers, rush in to help the wounded, a second drone strikes them. This tactic is a flagrant, undeniable violation of international law. But more than that, it is definitive proof. It proves that the drone operators are not only watching their targets, they are studying the response, waiting patiently to maximize civilian casualties, and deliberately targeting those whose sole duty is to save lives. This is the factual basis for the UN's conclusion. This was widespread, conducted across a 300-kilometer front. It was systematic, a daily, recurrent, and organized campaign. And it was directed against a civilian population, proven by the human safari, and the deliberate targeting of individuals, aid points, and ambulances. The evidence for this is not based on hearsay. It is built from those 226 witness accounts, and corroborated by the technical verification and geolocation of 247 separate videos, a fraction of the more than 500 that were examined. This was not a campaign to defeat an army. It was a system designed to terrorize a population. The next, crucial question for investigators was, how could they prove, in a court of law, the intent behind the trigger? In any war crimes prosecution, this is the legal precipice. It is the most difficult element to prove. It is the mens rea, the guilty mind. How do you prove what a soldier was thinking? How do you distinguish a tragic accident, the fog of war, from a deliberate, willful decision to commit murder? In past conflicts, this was the wall where accountability so often crumbled. A commander could claim they had faulty intelligence. A soldier could claim they believed they were firing at a legitimate military target. Report A, 8497 details how the very technology of this campaign eliminates that defense. The fog of war is lifted, replaced by a crystal clear, digital record. The attacks are not being carried out by artillery firing blindly from 20 kilometers away. They are conducted with short-range drones equipped with, quote, live streaming, high-resolution video feeds. The report states this allows for real-time observation and tracking. This technology neutralizes the accident defense. The operator is not guessing. They are watching. The drone operator is, in effect, the primary eyewitness to their own crime. When they follow a civilian for several seconds, when they track them as they sought shelter, when they can clearly see the red cross on the side of an ambulance, there is no room for ambiguity. The decision to strike is a conscious, deliberate choice. The high-resolution image on their screen is the proof. But the Commission's case for intent goes even further, documenting a tactic that demonstrates not just a split-second decision, but cold, calculated planning. This is the double tap strike. This tactic is more than just a war crime in itself. It is a perfect, chilling window into the operator's intent. It is a calculated, two-step procedure. Step 1. The drone strikes a civilian target, a car, an apartment, a public gathering. Step 2. The operator does not leave. They wait. They continue to observe the target they just hit, using that same, live streaming, high-resolution camera. They wait for the inevitable response. The ambulance, the medics, the fire brigade, the fellow civilians rushing to pull victims from the rubble. And then, the drone strikes again, targeting the rescuers. This is undeniable proof of mens rea. It proves a willful, premeditated plan to kill not just civilians, but also the protected medical and rescue personnel who come to their aid. This is not a fog of war mistake. It is not a reckless act committed in the heat of battle. It is a patient, methodical, and systematic execution. The high-resolution camera provides the knowledge. The double tap provides the proof of intent. When combined, these two elements provided the UN with the evidence they needed to build their case for murder. But this system had one final component. It wasn't just designed to kill. It was designed to terrorize. But the system had one final, psychological layer. The camera on the drone served a dual purpose. Its first purpose was to target, to provide the real-time evidence of intent. Its second purpose was to record. This physical warfare was fused with a psychological operation. The UN Commission found that Russian military units and affiliated groups would then post this footage, this record of a killing, onto public Telegram channels. The report calls these videos ghoulish. They are posted as trophies. This practice is not just immoral. It is a distinct, separate war crime in itself. The UN identifies it as outrages upon personal dignity. This is a profound violation. It strips the victim of their humanity twice. First, in the act of murder. And second, by turning their final, terrifying moments into a piece of public entertainment, a spectacle for jeering online crowds. It is the ultimate act of humiliation and degradation. But like everything else in this system, this was not just random cruelty. It was functional. It served a strategic purpose. The report details how these ghoulish videos were often accompanied by menacing language and warnings for remaining Ukrainian residents to flee the area. This is the link. This is where the murder of one becomes a threat against all. The post amplifies the threat. It takes the death of a single person on a bicycle and broadcasts it to everyone in the region with a phone. It sends a clear, undeniable message: you are not safe. We are hunting you. We can strike you at any time. And when we do, we will post the video. This is how the human safari becomes a tool of mass coercion. It is the engine that generates a permanent climate of terror. This terror is what the UN report identifies as the coercive environment. It is a state of fear, systematically applied and amplified, to make life itself unbearable. And it was this environment, this weaponized fear, that was designed to achieve the ultimate strategic goal. It wasn't just to kill. It was to empty, to drive an entire population from their homes, without ever having to send in a single soldier. When we hear the term forcible transfer of population, our minds go to this. The stark, brutal imagery of the 20th century. Soldiers with rifles. Deportation trains. A physical, unambiguous act of herding people from their land. This is what the 21st century version of that same crime looks like. The soldiers are replaced by an unseen drone operator, miles away. The rifle butt is replaced by a permanent climate of terror. This is the most critical and innovative legal argument in the UN's report. The Commission concludes that the drone campaign itself constitutes the crime against humanity of forcible transfer of population. The legal term is constructive forcible transfer. In law, constructive means that the effect is the same, so the law treats the act as the same. The Commission's legal argument is meticulous. It proceeds like this. First, the systematically coordinated and relentless drone attacks, combined with the psychological terror of the Telegram videos, created unbearable living conditions. Life becomes an impossible calculation. You cannot go to the market. You cannot drive your car to visit family. You cannot send your children to school. You cannot even gather for a funeral. You feel, as witnesses stated, hunted from above 24 hours a day. Second, the report argues that when a civilian flees this environment, they are not making a voluntary decision. The choice to abandon your home, your land, your job, and your entire life to save your family is not a choice at all. It is a reaction to manufactured, unbearable, and constant pressure. The terror is the force. Therefore, this coerced flight is legally tantamount. It is legally the same as a direct, physical, forcible transfer. The UN's conclusion is that the intent of this state policy was explicitly, quote, to drive Ukrainians out of their homes. And this system was successful. The report notes that some of the targeted areas along the Dnipro are now almost entirely vacated. This was depopulation by remote control, a strategy to empty a strategic corridor of its people. But this constructive terror was only one half of the strategy. At the very same time, in the territories Russia did control, the Commission found a second, parallel system, one that was far more direct and far more bureaucratic. While this high-tech campaign of terror was emptying the Ukrainian-controlled side of the river, the UN Commission found a second, parallel strategy was underway. In the territories Russia already occupied, the method was not coercion from a distance. It was direct, physical, and chillingly bureaucratic. The report details this second track, the direct deportations and transfers of civilians, primarily from the Russian-occupied parts of the Zaporizhia region. This is a grave breach of international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions explicitly forbid an occupying power from deporting or transferring the protected population of the territory it controls, regardless of the motive. Russian officials have repeatedly claimed these were evacuations for the civilians' own safety. But the Commission's findings flatly contradict this. The report states clearly that Russian authorities have coordinated actions to deport or transfer civilian persons. These civilians were unlawfully moved, either to other locations within Ukrainian-controlled territory or, in some cases, forced into third countries, with the report specifically citing transfers to Georgia. And this process was not a simple, peaceful relocation. It was, the UN found, inseparable from other, severe human rights abuses. The report documents that victims of this direct transfer were subjected to arbitrary detention. Their identity documents were confiscated, effectively making them stateless. Some were tortured. The Commission concluded that this process inflicted severe mental pain and suffering, and that the transfers were not justified by security or other imperative reasons. But where the drone campaign's intent had to be meticulously proven through tactics like the double tap, this direct campaign provided a different, more traditional kind of proof. It provided a paper trail. It revealed the bureaucracy of the crime. The report's annexes include the smoking gun official decision on deportation orders. These documents, issued by the Russian-controlled Ministry of Internal Affairs, are not suggestions. They are not evacuation notices. They are formal, legal orders compelling the deportation of a civilian population. This is the coordinated state policy, made manifest. It is the signature on the crime. It is undeniable, documentary evidence that these transfers were not a chaotic side effect of war, but a deliberate, organized, and centrally directed policy. The very definition of a systematic act. These two findings are not disconnected. They are not separate, parallel campaigns that happen to be occurring at the same time. They are two components of a single, unified strategy. Two different tools, from the same toolbox, chosen to achieve the same end goal, the strategic depopulation of southern Ukraine. The method is simply adapted to the reality on the ground. In the territory Russia covets but does not control, the right bank of the Dnipro, it uses constructive force. Here, the goal is expulsion. The tool is terror. The unbearable drone campaign, the human safari, and the psychological warfare of the Telegram channels are all designed to drive out the population. The objective is to make the land so unlivable that Ukrainians themselves are forced to flee, leaving behind an empty, strategic buffer zone. In the territory Russia does occupy, like parts of Zaporizhia, it uses direct force. Here, the goal is control and removal. The tools are bureaucratic, filtration, camps, arbitrary detention, torture, and the formal deportation orders. The objective is not to simply scare people away, but to process them, to identify, remove, and deport the pro-Ukrainian population. This is about physically removing those deemed undesirable, and altering the demographic character of the land Russia intends to hold. One strategy, two methods. Expulsion by terror on one side of the river, removal by bureaucracy on the other. This is the hybrid nature of modern atrocity. It combines the high-tech, remote control violence of a drone, with the low-tech, banal evil of a deportation stamp. Both serve the identical strategic goal. They are designed to alter the very fabric of southern Ukraine, to empty a strategic corridor of its Ukrainian inhabitants, and to make it unlivable for those who remain. This is the coordinated state policy the UN report identified, a systematic plan to erase a population from its land. A report like A. 8497 is not written to be filed away. It is an instrument. The moment it was published on October 21, 2025, and presented to the UN General Assembly, it ceased to be a simple investigation. It became a new, powerful tool in the diplomatic and legal conflict, one that triggered an immediate and starkly divided international response. On one side, there was the Russian Federation. Its response was not one of engagement, but of consistent denial and active obstruction. Moscow's official position was simple: it does not recognize the Commission. This was not a passive disagreement. It was, as the report itself details, a policy of total non-cooperation. The UN Commission states that 35 separate written requests for access, for information, and for meetings, remained unanswered. This wall of silence had a direct impact on the investigation. The Commission noted that it was unable to draw any conclusions regarding Russia's own counter-allegations, its claims of Ukrainian attacks, precisely because Moscow denied it access and refused to provide any information. This obstruction stands in direct contrast to Russia's public narrative. While its officials continue to maintain the false narrative that they never target civilians, its government actively blocked the independent UN body tasked with verifying those very claims. On the other side, the report was immediately seized upon by allied nations, international bodies, and independent human rights organizations. Crucially, the UN's findings did not exist in a vacuum. They were a powerful, official corroboration of what other groups were already documenting. The independent, hunted from above, report by Human Rights Watch, for example, had drawn the exact same conclusions. It had independently verified dozens of videos of deliberate drone strikes on civilians in Kherson and cross-referenced them with the same Russian Telegram channels. This independent corroboration strengthened the UN's case, transforming the findings from a single report into an international consensus. This consensus was then immediately put to use as a diplomatic tool. The clearest example came just days later. On November 5, 2025, the United Kingdom's delegation to the OSCE stood up in a formal international forum. They did not just condemn Russia's actions in general terms. They directly quoted Report A, 8497. They used the report's specific, legal language to systematically counter the false narrative. This is the report's primary diplomatic function. It provides an objective, unimpeachable source of truth from an independent UN body. It allows allied nations to shift the debate. Russia can no longer claim its actions are legitimate evacuations or responses to terrorism. The international community can now respond. The United Nations has investigated this and has concluded, as a matter of fact, that you are committing crimes against humanity. The European Union's response was both political and practical. The report's findings were used to justify two immediate pushes. First, a call for new, tougher sanctions. By legally identifying the drone campaign as the murder weapon, the report provided the legal and moral urgency to sanction Russia's entire drone supply chain, specifically targeting entities in China and elsewhere that enable this human safari. Second, it was used to justify accelerating the EU's own defense programs and its cooperation with Ukraine on counter-drone technology. The report, therefore, created a clear dividing line. For Russia, it was a document to be ignored. For the rest of the world, it was a tool to be used. A tool for sanctions, for diplomacy, and, most importantly, for justice. Ultimately, a report like A, 8497 is not written for history. It is written for prosecution. Its final, and perhaps most important, function is as an actionable, legal toolkit, handed directly to prosecutors. The International Criminal Court was already investigating the situation in Ukraine. In 2023, it issued its first, historic arrest warrants for President Vladimir Putin and his Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. But those warrants were for a very specific, and in some ways narrow, war crime, the unlawful deportation of children. Report A, 8497 provides the ICC prosecutor with a shovel-ready case to expand this investigation dramatically. It provides the evidentiary and, critically, the legal basis for new warrants based on the far-reaching crimes against humanity. This is how the report solves the problem of command responsibility. A war crime can be blamed on a rogue general. But a crime against humanity, by legal definition, requires a coordinated state policy. A low-level drone operator, or even a local commander, cannot create a state policy. A systematic, 300-kilometer-wide campaign of murder and depopulation executed over 10 months and fused with a psychological media operation, requires planning, resources, and orders from the very top. The report's finding of a coordinated state policy is the explicit legal link. It provides the pathway to attribute these crimes, the murder, the transfer, directly to the senior Russian military and political leadership who planned, ordered, and resourced this human safari. But this toolkit also provides a brilliant, and crucial, legal pathway. For years, there has been a complex international debate about creating a new, special tribunal, just to prosecute the crime of aggression, the initial act of invasion. This is because, due to complex legal rules, the ICC lacks jurisdiction over that one specific crime in this context. But this UN report provides a direct, existing legal pathway to hold the exact same senior leadership accountable, without needing to build a new court. The ICC has jurisdiction over crimes against humanity in Ukraine. This report provides the basis for charges, murder, and forcible transfer, that can be prosecuted today, within the existing, globally recognized legal framework. It bypasses the political hurdles of the aggression debate and offers a direct, actionable path to the same individuals at the top of the chain of command. And this toolkit isn't just for the ICC. Its findings will be deposited in the EU's evidence database. They will be used by the 17+ EU member states that have already opened their own national investigations into Russian war crimes, allowing them to pursue charges under the principle of universal jurisdiction. The report provides the common legal and factual foundation for a global, multi-pronged effort to ensure accountability. The UN Commission of Inquiry's October 2025 report, A. 8497, is therefore a legal and factual watershed. It is the moment the international community officially translated a collection of seemingly random, brutal, and ghoulish acts into the precise, legal language of a crime against humanity. The story it tells is not one of chaos, but of calculation. It is the story of a system. It's a system that revealed a coordinated state policy for the depopulation of a strategic region. A policy with two distinct, parallel tracks. On one side, a campaign of constructive forcible transfer, using the high-tech terror of the human safari to create a coercive environment, so unbearable, it compelled thousands to flee. On the other, a campaign of direct forcible transfer, using the low-tech, banal bureaucracy of the deportation order, to physically and systematically remove the population from the lands Russia occupied. It is a hybrid strategy, fusing 21st century psychological warfare with 20th century methods of state-led displacement. But the final, major conclusion of this story, the dangerous link it reveals, is not just about what happened. It is about how it was achieved. This report is a warning. It is the first definitive, legal documentation of how cheap, disposable, modern technology has been repurposed into the primary instrument for committing one of the most ancient and grave crimes in international law. The FPV drone, a tool from a hobbyist's shop, has been transformed. It has become the perfect weapon for a human safari. Its high-resolution camera lifts the fog of war, and provides its own, undeniable proof of intent. Its live streaming feed allows for the double tap, the methodical, patient targeting of first responders. Its recorded footage provides the ghoulish propaganda to amplify the psychological terror, turning the murder of one into a threat against all. It allows an operator, sitting safely miles away, to hunt, terrorize, and ultimately displace an entire population by remote control. By building its case on the perpetrator's own videos, cross-referenced with 226 individual witness testimonies, the UN Commission has effectively neutralized Russia's false narrative. It has provided the evidence, the legal argument, and the direct link to coordinated state policy. Report A. 8497 is more than just a document. It is a definitive record of how a 21st century human safari was engineered to execute an age-old atrocity. And now, it serves as the foundational, legal toolkit for diplomats, for policymakers, and for the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court, handing them the power, and the obligation, to hold the architects of that entire system to account.